5:01. Let's get this meeting started. So, everybody, welcome to the Thursday, November 17th Nantucket Conservation Commission meeting. We're meeting in person today, which is fun. And we're here to basically discuss our regulations. We'll open up the public meeting with public comment on items not being heard. All right, no comment from our small public. So we'll begin the workshop discussion of potential changes to the Town of Nantucket Wetland Protection Regulations, Chapter 390. I know, Jeff, one thing I noticed in the most recent send out, that like formatting issue came back.
Yeah.
Did it?
Yeah.
It's a whole slew of pages.
From like 13 to 17 or something.
12 to 16.
12 to 16.
Yeah.
There's a lot of formatting.
Yeah, so.
Will, why did you break it?
Uh-oh.
No, we'll take a look. Some of the formatting things are weird. Again, once we get through council review, the final formatting will actually be done by the company that does these for us. The people that did the codification that put it up to the website so it's searchable, put it into final format so it goes up onto the website. So they'll clean up some of it. So I do apologize for it, but again, we'll get it fixed.
Yeah, I mean, there's really nothing more frustrating than trying to figure out why something's formatting funny, so I
Which is
totally.
weird because it doesn't format weird on my computer. at all.
Yeah, it's actually fine on mine
Oh, is
too.
it? It's my PDF
When
and my Word or
When I
like that.
opened the PDF, it was messed up. The Word document's fine.
Oh,
So I'm open in Word,
Yeah,
and it's doing the same thing.
I'm in Word also.
Yeah.
It's a
So,
mess.
do you see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
it goes from
Since you're in
page.
compatibility mode, that might have something to do with it.
Well, I'll
Yeah,
hand.
it's because you guys are all in
Well,
compatibility mode.
let me hand it over to the younger generation who knows how to use
No,
this thing and show
it's-
me what I'm doing
Yeah.
wrong.
It's not anything
Um,
you're doing wrong. It's that your
the
your
Word's out
type
date.
of word that you have is out of date with the current version, and in order to get it,
Ah.
it's a word issue, not a you issue.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm out of date is because I feel it's an irritation to have to cough up several $100s to get the
That's-
modern version.
That's
I
fine, I understand that, but
Which
that's
is
where
no
the
different
issue
from the
is.
previous version.
but you know. So,
Right.
I know.
That's the issue.
Okay.
So
Thank
Seth
you.
may be able to help you, Joe, if you're in compatibility mode to turn it off, or he may be.
No,
You can try to turn it off
Okay.
if you click that. No,
No,
it's
click
not
it.
gonna,
What bothers
it won't let
me
you.
is I marked down all the pages that had
No,
problems based on what I had here. If we
But
go-
I'll
Oh.
go
do a
online
different
afterwards and see if I
thing,
can do something about it.
That's enough
Otherwise, I'll
for you?
probably
We'll
just have to
know
bite the
where
bullet
we
and
are.
buy the new
No
version.
worries.
No,
Yeah,
they
I
should be able
guess.
to send out a version that is
Compatible?
compatible with
Okay.
the old
Yeah.
softwares, but
Okay.
If we know that's an issue, we can send the old like DocCs
yeah.
instead of the DocXs.
Anyway,
Mine usually is alright with DocX, but nothing is up to date over here,
Indelible
so.
ink, handwritten, please.
Alright, so that we'll
We'll
take
be
care
right
of that piece. Does anybody else, have anything they'd like to add, change, things they notice? We can go around individual by individual, if we want, like last time. That worked fairly well.
yep, I mean, I have, like, most of my things are down to 3 main points at this point.
Okay. Hi, Linda.
We get your printed copy down at the end.
Here you go.
We can print off other copies too if people need.
It's just so much easier.
Seth, do you wanna go ahead, or do you want somebody else to go?
If you allow it, I can go.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so the first thing, which is kind of a larger discussion item, is we had a discussion at the last meeting regarding extending buffer zone activities or pushing them out, so that the no activity zone would be 50 feet and the no build zone would be, I think we said 100 feet. And I think that might have gotten updated in Salt Marsh only, but nowhere else.
So what page is Salt Marsh?
I'm gonna
Okay.
find out.
Was this just related to the pool issue, or was this period?
This is related to everything.
I've got the page numbers right here in my old-fashioned word.
Salt Marsh is section 390-11, and you can find out what page that is in a second.
I'm getting up there. I've got it. That's enough.
I have it, it's page
Page 46.
390-29 is how,
It's 46, actually.
46?
yeah, because I don't have
Oh,
page
yeah.
numbers on this.
Yeah, I got it. So page 46.
It's actually page 48, so it's B4 is what you're referring to.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Right, yeah, in Salt Marsh, B4, it says, projects that are not water dependent shall maintain now a 50-foot natural undisturbed area, and then it says all structures shall not be closer than 75 feet. I don't know if that's what we decided on or not. And then there's still this bit about 50% of the area between the 25-foot buffer and the 50-foot buffer shall not be altered. And that doesn't really make sense anymore because we're now actually saying 100% shall not be altered. And then in all the resource areas that have buffer zones, I didn't see that updated anywhere else. It's still showing the 25-foot and the 50-foot with the 25-foot to 50-foot, 50% disturbance ratio. So I think, needs to be Salt Marsh, BBW, Coastal Beach, all the ones that have a Coastal Bay, Coastal View, and all the ones that have a buffer zone associated with them.
No, I would agree. I think that was the intention discussed.
Right.
So, Will, are you the one primary? Are you both kind of tag teaming this now, Jeff and Will?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, it's better when you have a friend, right?
It is.
Will is doing the heavy lifting for the typing, and I'm using a pen.
Okay.
So we'll make sure that it's.
So Mark Beal and Mike couldn't come?
We
Mark
didn't hear from
supposedly,
Mark, so-
Mike said he couldn't come,
He could or couldn't?
could not.
I mean, it's a
Nothing from
tough
Mark.
time of year. A little chaotic out there.
Can be, yeah. So is that clear on that point?
Yes.
Now,
Yeah.
just to, I'm always learning every
Sorry,
time we
scroll up.
talk about this stuff. Why are we doing that in particular?
So the reason for doing that is because there's a large volume of scientific studies showing that the 25 and 50-foot buffer zones aren't really suitable for protecting at least some of the interests that we protect, especially wildlife. And with increasing flood events, probably the stormwater interest and the water supply interest, but especially wildlife. Some of the species that we're tasked to protect actually need hundreds of feet. And we're not going to be able to do that logistically probably, but there is a benefit to doing what we can to help protect that interest.
And you're applying that only to the buffer zone?
To buffer
areas.
zone, yeah.
Okay.
I think
It's-
also,
it's in
Linda,
here
the
somewhere else.
consensus, Linda, at the last meeting was that we're just seeing ever-increasing pressure on the 25 to 50, well,
Yeah,
at every level.
25, 250, yeah.
Yeah, and so we've decided that really, it's better to try and take precautionary measures while we still can.
Is anywhere else in the state do this particular thing? So we're not just reinventing the wheel here.
Yes, there is at least one or two other towns with bylaws that adopted these same regulations, and I've submitted those towns before.
Yep.
I don't know if we've done an exhaustive check of all the 351 municipalities to see what, or actually not everyone has a bylaw, so, or an ordinance, so. There are towns, there are municipalities that share those same buffer zones that we're trying to do.
There are something just to hop in too for everyone, that honor smaller buffer zones, but require things like mitigation.
Yeah.
With any project and not just a permissible area for things to happen. So it's a little bit of a hodgepodge throughout the state, but I don't think these buffer zones are something that people haven't done before by any means.
Okay.
Yeah, and I did read some that were like, I think it was Arlington that adopted the 50 and 100, and they put in their 50 that temporary disturbance activities are permitted, and they listed what all those things are. But I personally just prefer to handle that through the waiver process than try to list out every possible thing that you could ever imagine, because especially with the, level of activity that happens on Nantucket and not being able to anticipate what we'll need for the future, we're gonna have to write a pretty exhaustive list about what is considered temporary activities.
Well, the problem is when you do list stuff, you miss stuff. So in the zoning bylaw, they don't list everything, because if you start listing everything, you unintended consequence, you didn't list something, and then it becomes a problem.
Right.
So there's still waivers for this
Yeah,
area? Okay.
yeah, the same waiver regulations would
Okay.
apply. It would just, the times when a applicant would need to apply for them will change based on which buffer zone they're in now. So it'll either result in, if people are trying to still do the same projects, a lot more waiver requests, or it will result in people reading what we've said and deciding to change how they approach building on site.
Cool.
Okay, second thing is I appreciate the definition of normal maintenance being put in, but I'm not entirely confident it's exactly correct. I think
Where's that-
everything,
Where's that in
it's
here?
on page
Or what number?
13 on my, it's in the definitions,
13.
page
Yeah.
13 in my,
Going backwards.
yeah, sorry, I'm not going in order. Everything up until right at the end reads good to me. I just think total replacement isn't enough of a enough of a measure. I think we need to somehow define what something less than total replacement that essentially does the same thing as total replacement is. And I think we should also add modifying uses by like changing materials or protocols also does not count as normal maintenance. To me, if you're gonna like replace, more than 50% of a structure, I would consider that no longer normal maintenance. But that's just me personally.
Well, question through Madam Chair.
Yep.
Is this a little bit more of a casual?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
it's a
Yeah,
little
okay.
more of a casual discussion.
The 12 inches in diameter, there are very few trees on Nantucket that are 12 inches in diameter. The planning board has dealt with 4-inch caliper, 6-inch caliper, very little beyond 6-inch. Do you think 12-inch caliper is just, it should be reduced?
12-inch DBH is a pretty big tree.
We've typically been using 4.
That's what I'm saying, 12 inches is really large. Shouldn't we
Yeah.
back it down to something that cedar trees can be 6 to 8 inch in diameter? So I
Yeah.
think 12 is too big, because there's very few 12-inch trees that are in the areas that we have jurisdiction over that exist anymore. So if we're gonna do that, then we should probably make the tree a smaller tree that we have control over.
Yeah, I agree, and I wonder there's maybe some confusion. So we have our like view shed management regulation piece that's going in, and that talks about 4-inch
Right, it does.
Yeah.
DBH. I don't know how I don't know how cutting of a tree could be normal maintenance anyways, because if you're having a use that is, you know, historic, and you're trying to say, okay, this is normal maintenance, you're not gonna be like examples of people cutting down 12-inch DBH trees and then later going back and cutting them again because they're already gone. So
Yeah.
I don't know if tree cutting is normal maintenance.
I can't see that as being normal maintenance unless the tree is growing into the house.
Yeah, I mean, I get like you cleared a path, right? And you have pre-existing use of like, let's say clearing a path 5 feet from a wetland, but you've been doing that since 1930. You know, it's normal maintenance to keep clearing that path, keep mowing it or brush cutting it or whatever it is. Once you cut trees, they're kind of
They're
gone.
gone.
Yeah.
They're certainly not planting again.
I
But
would
there's so
just-
many healthy trees, if you look in Winnet, there's a lot of healthy trees below that bluff. Cedar trees.
I'm fine with saying the 4 inches, or I'm fine with saying, you know, it doesn't, cutting of trees doesn't apply either way.
Or take the 12-inch out completely,
Yeah, and
and
move
then
it
it
down
would
to
be
the
a
4.
case-by-case basis.
Well, I mean, you could just simply have it read, you know, it does not include additional placement of fill on or excavation of previously undisturbed soils or slopes, clearing, removal, or cutting of trees, period. Or comma there, because then you're not dealing with any as normal maintenance.
Right.
Yeah, I just worry though that people are gonna say like, oh, I have this row of shrubs that is technically black cherry, and you know, it's actually a tree, and they've been like brush cutting that black cherry shrub line for like 100 years.
Yeah.
Then they're gonna say, oh, I can't do that anymore. So we can put the 4-inch
Then go back to the 4-inch,
DBH in
so
there.
it's consistent.
I have a maybe annoying nitpicky question about this. Can we change cutting to pruning? Is that legal?
Well, it's totally
Yeah.
different. Well, they're two different things. If you cut
'Cause
down
it's-
a tree versus pruning a tree.
But it says clearing, removal, or cutting of trees.
Yeah, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, or it doesn't even really make sense
We
if you
could
put
just
pruning
add
in there
pruning.
because we're talking about.
Yeah, I guess removal.
Maybe we
and
just don't
cutting
need
would be
cutting.
the same thing.
Yeah,
So clearing or removal of trees.
Greater than 4 inches.
And then I guess what are other people's thoughts on the total replacement of a structure piece?
where's that one?
It's right at the end. So
At
You
the
know,
end or the end?
No,
at
at
the
the
Right
end of
after
the-
the tree.
right after the tree thing.
or
I
the-
think-
Oh, the previous surface thing?
No,
No,
it's
it's
like right
le-
after.
Still in normal maintenance, just right at the end of that sentence.
Or
that
total
paragraph.
Oh,
replacement.
they're still up there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think like everybody is probably in
Hmm.
agreement that if you completely replace the structure,
That's not.
it's not
Not
normal
normal
maintenance.
I mean,
maintenance.
maintenance is like replacing the decking or the shingles.
Right,
Paint.
but
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
like, this is where it
Windows.
gets tricky, because for me, like, if you have to replace all of the shingles in your whole roof on a historic structure, you're probably doing like a very extensive percentage of replacement.
Not really. I do a lot of roofs. It's just roofs and trim, that's it.
All right, well, that's a bad example. But let's say you have like a pier and you have to replace all of the piles and all of the boards or something, or all of the cross members and all of the boards, but all the piles are fine. You're just like lifting up the deck and then you're not redoing piles. I mean, I don't know. That just doesn't seem like maintenance to me. It seems like you're building a new structure. It's kind of like what's that mythical thing with the ship? Whatever. It's like the myth where you're on the ship, and if you once a day take out a plank and replace it with a new plank, You keep doing that for years until there are no original planks on the ship. Do you have the same ship or a new ship?
I used to do that here,
In
one
the
board at a
USS
time.
Constitution, you have the original, although nothing is original
Yeah,
at this point.
Anyways, we're divulging, but I think that if you've done something like, I don't know necessarily what it is, but something extensive enough to be viewed by outsiders as like you replaced the whole thing, even if you didn't do 100% replacement. For me, that's just not maintenance. And I don't know how we.
you're gonna have a problem with that sentence, just from a code issue, a demolition issue.
Yeah, I'm not saying
I-
that's the
do we-
sentence we
I think we have a
use.
problem with that sentence, period.
Do we say something along the lines of, like, identifying maintenance as something that's done routinely, like I know we've used it before, every 5 years? Like, maintenance is something you do every few years to keep up, but if it's something like replacing every single plank that's like once in 20 years, somehow like qualify it that?
I'd be careful with that
Way.
because it's subjective to some extent, having dealt with it on the HCC part of it.
Yeah, I
Because
mean,
there's demolition, then there's demolition by neglect, which you gotta replace half the building. There's, replacement of a wall because it's rotted or it blew out because of an explosion. There's very difficult to quantitate that sentence.
I agree too, and like every type of activity that we're trying to regulate has different design life. Like the waterproof boards on a saltwater pier may not last the same as the same boards on a buffer zone boardwalk.
And it depends on where it is, whether it's exposed like on the North Shore or it's Nantucket Harbor. You know, there's all kinds of
But
differences.
But I still think before we get to 100% replacement, there's some buff or some trigger that we go over that it's not maintenance anymore.
I mean, do we need like these structures when people apply for them? And I know we have ones that haven't been applied for, so that doesn't work. But like, if someone were to apply for a new boardwalk, outline what their regular maintenance looks like, you know, and anything beyond the regular maintenance outlined in their permit.
We
Which
could do that, right? We could require any structures to submit a maintenance plan,
You could.
You could,
and then,
trying to think out ahead.
If,
I'm not sure, we'd have to, how do we enforce a maintenance plan? That's another
well, we're
problem.
not necessarily gonna enforce on it, but we're gonna use it as a judge that if you need to do work above and beyond what's in that maintenance plan, then it's not normal maintenance anymore, it's repair or
Well,
replacement.
then we establish a threshold uniquely for each one of these projects, which makes it difficult for that last sentence to be in there. Because we still have that right, we have complete control over that.
Yeah, and I know it's a hard topic, and I don't personally have the answer, but I think there has to be something other than 100% total replacement.
We can say demolition and replacement.
But what if you, let's just go back to a pier, let's just say you have to, you have 100 piles in the pier and you have to take out 70 of them and put 70 new ones in. But, you know, you're not doing total replacement, you still have 30% of those piles left, but you're doing, there's a lot more new structure than there is old structure, that's
But
not.
they're still coming to us, no matter how much of it's left. And that's a determination we can make on a case-by-case basis, which is why I'd rather have the sentence end after the 4.5 feet thing.
Yeah, so I agree, the only reason I wanna get this definition right is that it's super important for regulating pre-existing use.
Yeah, but there must be a different ways of phrasing it than this. I think that just that whole total replacement of a structure has a very difficult definition in itself. Because otherwise you're gonna have to put in here replacement of a structure. You're gonna have to add another definition. So if you take it out, we still have control over how much and what they're doing and make that determination per project.
Maybe we can just let that sit for a while
Yeah,
and see if
think about that.
staff has any idea. I mean, this isn't the last hearing for that, but I'm
No, we still
concerned.
have to have our actual public hearing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm concerned about that language, I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Well, keep in mind too, I think,
What page was it again?
13, I believe.
Part of the bad formatting.
Yeah,
Because I don't have any pages on
Page
mine.
14 on mine.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's,
I have no pages
it's
on mine.
13 on my PDF. And I think,
it may be something too, right, like, I think one of the hopes at the end of this section or the next one, or whenever we get it close enough, it may be something that town council flags or has some thoughts on too,
Hmm.
for how that goes in, because that's kind of our next step, is once we get a final draft, to get it to council for review, and then schedule the public hearing from there. So, there'll be a few other reviewers, we can try to puzzle that out. I made a note of maybe mentioning something about change of material or something to try to deal with that. But I agree with Linda, doing percentages can be very difficult for how you assess what that percentage is.
Hmm.
And it depends on which type of structure, right? Is it 50% of a set of beach stairs is not the same as 50% of a house,
Yeah,
right? And I don't think everyone's gonna ever just replace 50% of a house and be like, that was normal maintenance. But someone might replace all of the,
Windows.
the treads and on a set of beach stairs and just leave the stairs. And that's probably more than 50%, but I don't think anyone would say that replacing just the treads on a set of stairs is not regular maintenance.
yeah, well, I think maintenance normally comes down to what you would argue is wear and tear.
Yeah.
So that's a good example of wear and tear.
but then that
So-
also, like, the pier that might need all its pilings replaced, that's also kind of wear and tear.
Right.
It is if you're replacing with the same material.
Okay.
Well, I think you could argue, I
Yeah.
mean, you're absolutely right.
This is a
It's-
tough one.
I mean, I'll be honest, when we put this one in, I looked around for a lot of definitions of normal maintenance, and they're weirdly not easy to come by.
No,
Right.
It
Because
seems very subjective.
it is
Yeah.
incredibly
and
subjective.
you're right, it might be a council question, I think there's an obvious, no, I think there's not an obvious, but there is some threshold or trigger that before you get to 100%, you've done something other than maintenance. I don't know what that threshold or trigger is, I don't know the language to write it, but that's what I'm trying to say. And then my last thing relates to the definitions of,
I'll tell you what, before we move on,
go ahead.
take the word normal out. Normal is a subjective term, there's no definition of normal maintenance. Maintenance, there might be something that we can glom onto, but normal is not a normal word. When we're dealing with it in the building code or HCC, maintenance is maintenance. It's not necessarily normal maintenance, because that's where you can get into trouble. What's normal, what's not normal, depending on the house, where it's situated, how big the house is, difference on normal maintenance on Hooper Farm is different than one on the North Shore kind of thing. I look at that word normal.
My high school math teacher did tell me that normal was only a setting on a washing machine, but I think the,
Maybe
The-
regular maintenance.
yeah,
or
I think the other
periodic
issue
maintenance
is,
or
is
What's
still,
regular?
routine.
I think the other issue still
What's
stands,
routine?
whether we
Yeah,
take
right.
out normal or not, it's how do we define what
the
maintenance
other
is.
problem is, like, if you look back at the
Defined by the
definition for like
conditions on site.
grandfather
Yeah,
and
for each
pre-existing
It
use,
says
property.
normal
it
maintenance.
specifically says normal maintenance.
But we could change
So-
that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just think about that one.
So then the last thing relates to the definitions of impervious and pervious surface. I think they're sort of opposites of each other, but this might be a nerdy request, but I think we need to somehow characterize pervious surface to say that pervious surfaces that were designed to be pervious but have been not maintained in the proper way are no longer pervious. So like if you have a,
Page is this?
this is page 14.
Yeah,
It's on
mine
the
is-
same page as for me.
Mine is really screwed up here.
It's on the same page.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
not helpful.
So if you have like, a
Yeah,
sand
it's
lot.
moved into the margin, Ian.
Right.
If you have a-
Yeah.
if you have like a pile of sand, loose sand, and water usually goes through it, and then it's been significantly compacted, water goes through it a lot less easily.
Right.
Or if you have a, like, let's say, dry laid stone patio, where the water's supposed to infiltrate in the cracks, but the cracks are full of like debris or rock or whatever, water infiltrates a lot less easily through those. So I think we need something, I think generally when we review plans for these projects, we need any pervious surfaces that are proposed to go in to, we need applicants to give us measures of permeability
So
for
like
those surfaces.
runoff coefficients and
Sure,
things.
yeah, that would be fine. And then if in, let's say, application for a certificate of compliance, the applicant should also rerun those permeability coefficients and make sure they're still within the range that they originally were. Or if not, they should be repaired or maintained to maintain that permeability. I know we're gonna have to get a little scientific with how we do it, but I think, like, plans are good until the first shot is fired. You can't just say, this is pervious and it lasts forever. You have to actually upkeep your permeability. I would request we look into that a little bit.
Thank you for bringing that up, because the majority of job sites around here now, I mean, the way the soil is compacted and then they just kind of put topsoil on top of that, I mean, I think the ability for water to percolate down to groundwater is getting more and more difficult on these sites, so.
Yeah, and is it still more pervious than asphalt? Sure, but is it let's say degraded? Is the permeability degraded to a point where it's not really suiting our goals of groundwater infiltration? In some cases it may be, but we kind of just overlook it and say, this project's compliance because they put the surface in, but they never maintained it or upkept it correctly. Those
How
are
would
my-
you suggest that we, after we've signed off, they've gone around the corner, a couple of years passes, conditions have changed, we're not gonna catch all that.
Yeah, I mean, after a certificate of compliance is issued, our ability for regulating sites in general goes way down. But it's still better to know for that 3 to 6 year period that the resources are being protected to the optimal level that was required in the order of conditions.
Is it possible in the order of conditions where we can require an update every 2 years, every 3 years on these highly sensitive projects?
Sure,
To
yeah.
that issue,
It
we
could-
can put
yeah,
that in
you
there.
Set
It could
that
be
as
like
an ongoing condition.
Yeah, and then, and when we ask for like annual monitoring reports
Yeah.
for projects, we can say an annual monitoring report in addition to all the other things it needs to have. It needs to have your permeability coefficients. And I guess when we issue certificates of compliance, we can carry that condition forward indefinitely. But are we gonna have a super high likelihood of enforcing on that? Probably not, but we still can carry it out.
Well, there'd be no way to like field enforce that, to look at it and be like, hey, that shell driveway looks like it's
Yeah,
coefficient.
unless,
Water is sheeting off of it.
unless like there was a clear, something weird going on, or the same property owner applied for a new permit in the future, there's some cases where it would probably come back up, but really beyond the order of conditions period, everything drops
I'm
off
just
anyway.
picturing when someone goes to run that coefficient, is they're gonna use the established value for that surface, and they're just gonna generate it again for their certificate of compliance. Be like, oh, the shell driveway is still a shell driveway, this is the coefficient that we use for the drainage calcs, they're just gonna run it again. Be like, still good. So I'm wondering if, I'm just trying to think of a way to tackle that a little bit differently, but it may take some puzzling out.
Yeah, and maybe that's not the best way, but I know these things
I
could
see
be,
the intent.
I know these things
Yeah.
can be empirically tested, but I don't want to burden the staff with having to go out and, pour water on every site and test it. that's absurd, but there's gotta be a way that we can do it.
Unless there's a lake forming where there wasn't a lake, or it's running down Monomoy Road where there wasn't any. So sometimes it's pretty obvious that there's an issue that didn't exist prior to whatever work they were doing on the property.
But when you think about that, like by the time it's so obvious and we're seeing it,
It's already
the
bad.
amount of time that groundwater hasn't been recharging, like it's been a
Been a while.
extreme, yeah.
Yeah.
But that is yeah,
I
that's a
can- I
good
mean,
point.
I can think about it too, and maybe the staff can think about it and get back from there, but those are the three things I had right now.
Well, thank you, Seth, all, very good points.
All right, shall I chip in then?
Go ahead.
All right, so on page 6, compatible material, beach or bank.
Hold on, page 6.
So compatible, the first is spelt wrong.
That's entirely possible.
Well, it's only in the first, in the capitalized compatible. It isn't in the lowercase compatible. But
I'm sure there's a lot of
Right.
typos and stuff that will get cleaned up at the end of here.
so I would like to add so that it reads the way it does, and then a comma at the end of percent composition, be it glacial deposition, cobble, or sand. So this really only addresses sand per se.
So Ian, read that again. It
So
said
it says
grain size, angularity, and percent composition.
composition,
Then what?
comma,
Yep.
be it glacial deposition, cobble, or sand. So you're talking about percent composition when you add, be it glacial deposition, cobble, or sand. So we asked the beach club, where there's a lot of cobble coming out, to add cobble to the fill that they were putting in front of it. And I think that's something that is important. It's not only sand that comes out of the bank.
Well, glacial moraine, is that including the glacial moraine and all that other stuff?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
There's an awful lot of big boulders coming out of there.
There are, some of them, yeah, no,
Big
there are.
boulders.
You know, in other words, there are,
Yeah,
so I think
it's-
we do have such a variable, geology here on the island. So I think I'd like to add that.
Can I ask a question about that same definition? So why just beach or bank? What about dune?
I mean, we certainly
Yeah.
could add it in there.
Yeah.
I mean, just looking around through the way the performance standards were, we've never referenced
'Cause you're not allowed
dune
to add-
compatible sand. We've always just referenced, when we deal with dunes, as beach compatible sand because of their interface with the beach. And it's that dunes are the accumulation of sediments deposited by wind and water that are those sand sediments moving. So we've never broken that apart. We could certainly just take out the beach or bank and just simply call it compatible material.
Yeah, I mean, what about like inland bank? What are we, I don't know if we really have a lot of applications for that, but if we have like inland bank nourishment, we should probably have compatible material with that
Yeah.
inland bank too.
Or
Oh, absolutely.
Even a wetland
You know, like
restoration
pond, the
Because
pond
again, if
bank
you
or
list
whatever.
them and it's a finite list,
I would just
then
say
it
compatible
precludes anything
material.
else.
Yeah, we can
So,
do that.
yeah.
Sometimes less is more.
So
Yes.
what are we doing here now?
So we're
What is-
taking out where it says beach or bank, and
Yeah.
it'll just be called compatible material.
Yeah,
And then it says material compatible to the parent material in coloration, grain size, angularity, and percent composition, be it glacial deposition, cobble, or sand.
great,
I
thank
may,
you.
if it's okay with you,
Yeah,
my soil
absolutely.
science nerdiness, I may flesh that out to include the other components that are
Mm,
typically in
yeah.
soil.
Yeah.
Please,
Fines and
Fines.
silts,
Silts,
clay.
clays.
Clays.
Yeah,
There's a
that,
couple
I think that
places.
that would be
Clay.
great.
There's only one or two places where there's clay, but it's
Yeah.
very interesting when you see it.
Well, that
And-
whole Millbrook Road,
Yeah,
all clay up there on, whatever that road is, that circle up there, everybody has clay.
And then on page 15,
where is
oh,
that
deer,
road there?
deer run.
Deer Run,
Deer Run.
oh, every single
Yeah.
house has clay.
15, Ian, is that what you
15
said?
for recreation, the definition of recreation. And so where we have added Oh, actually. So, activities of individuals done for relaxation carried out in resource areas of the bylaw, which include but not are limited to swimming, picnicking, and then I would like to add, if I can read my notes, unimpeded access in the intertidal, walking, so not limited, swimming, picnicking, walking, unimpeded access in the intertidal zone, hunting, fishing, and boating.
Can I offer a suggestion? What if we get the first line how it is, but we say preservation or expansion of unimpeded public access is needed to provide recreational
There we go.
opportunities.
So I'd
Perfect.
move that phrase up to the first line.
No, you just always, yes, but only half the phrase. So,
So leave out the intertidal zone part and just say unimpeded access.
yeah.
Yeah,
And where did you
so-
put that up there?
So I'll just read that because I have a note. So we'll just say recreation, activities of individuals done for relaxation carried out in resource areas of the bylaw, which include but are not limited to swimming, picnicking, walking, hunting, fishing and boating. Preservation or expansion of unimpeded public access is needed to provide recreational opportunities to the public.
Good.
Neatly done.
Do we need to say carried out in resource areas or their buffer zones? Or does it not matter?
That's probably just overstatement.
The interest itself, right, is what is happening within the resource area. The buffer zone is protecting the resource area and its interests. So I don't think you need to put the buffer zone
Okay,
separately.
that's fine.
Right. And so that's all I have to add, and thank you, everybody, for your work on this.
Yeah, it's looking good. Joe, do you have anything
I
tonight?
do,
Would you like to go ahead?
I would.
Okay.
Question I have is, you said this is all gonna get formatted properly,
Oh, yeah.
so there's no need to raise any of those issues.
No, formatting will get taken care of by professional formatters that make sure to go onto the
Yeah,
website.
and spelling and capitalization and punctuation and all that.
We have our own Geek Squad that
How
takes
about
care of that.
something like page 10? Page 10, impervious surface. Of all the definitions in there, that's the only one that's underlined it. I wonder if someone will pick that up.
Oh, it's only underlined right now because it's totally new, so the track changes feature. Because when we produce changes, and the formatting, this may be an issue that's there. When we add it in to distinguish that it's a change, we show it in the red and it underlines. So when it's all done and it's all
The
finished,
only reason I ask that is it doesn't do it for a lot of others that are, like swimming pool, for example.
It's because the type of review you have on. This is a more word problems, but you can show like simple markup, all markup. It depends on what type of markup you have on.
but nothing, to answer the question, when this is all done, all of the text will be all black without anything underlined.
And nothing in the
Margin.
columns.
Nothing in the margins or the sides.
And pagination, paginated if you print it out. And in fact, when we finally go to public meeting, I would love to have a printed copy too, if I may.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yep, and then
It's
just
just so
to,
much easier to deal with.
Well,
And then-
it's different.
Yeah.
just to clarify everyone too, right, is we've never updated the actual table of contents on the front.
Right.
Don't really feel the need until it
We're
gets
done.
settled to
Yeah.
adjust it 1,000 times.
Right.
But that's all stuff that will get cleaned up through
Okay,
formatting at the end.
page 18. Page 18, structure, line 1, 2, 3, 4. Line 4, equipment, comma, dry weight stone patios, comma.
Another case of the missing comma.
Missing commas. It's after the word patios.
Yeah,
Where's grammar check when you need
I
it?
know, I know.
And that's weird, sometimes I won't pick stuff like that up sometimes.
Yeah.
Like it's a dry lake stone, patio recreation.
I trust that you guys aren't adding bad grammar and words into your dictionary like the kids do these days.
Oh, you gotta go to the Urban Dictionary for that stuff.
No, well, they get something underlined in red, and instead of correcting it, they're like, add it to
Add
my
to dictionary.
dictionary. So then
Just
it,
spell it wrong.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, and then it will
perpetually.
recognize the wrong word
Forever.
over and over and over.
my
I will
life.
say in general, kids these days are abysmal spellers.
Yes.
I was an abysmal speller in first grade.
All right, so we got that comma, Joe. What's next?
I can't find the next one, which is on page, so I'm on the wrong page.
I'm gonna have to number these.
Page 24. Town, county,
Which page, Joe?
24.
Okay.
You know what section I'm in?
What section? At the bottom of the page.
Section 2?
It's tiny.
Yes.
Section 2, yeah.
Yeah, 2, town, county, it's already underlined, somebody ought to pick that up.
Sounds like Will's got it.
Yes.
Who gets their fees waived?
In 20, line, or page 27,
Wait, when the
There's
Isn't the
supposed, there should
state-
be an or,
Doesn't
is
the
that what?
state also get
B1,
A
fees
fee
waived? Like if there was, or federal government or any of, like if there was a U.S. Fish and Wildlife project for Great Point, wouldn't they get fees waived?
Maybe.
Okay.
Doubled.
No,
State really only has the state
Not for the
forest
feds.
land. I don't think there's any wetlands there, so.
No, it's kind of funky, like, it's also moments where the town gets all of our state fees waived, except for, Mass Natural Heritage, we have to
Oh,
pay
yeah.
that fee. So, we leave it in there, and it's something too where we cover ourselves, and then the state usually informs us that they will not be paying fees. We don't really argue with them about it when they say that to us.
Yeah, I think governmental organizations don't pay.
Mass Natural Heritage ever went to file a permit, I would charge them.
27 I mentioned, it says materials with this, it looks like a font problem only. And then you get over to page 33. And
so your pages are numbered on your
33,
computerized one, but not the one I have printed.
not down here.
Well, that's what I'm looking for.
Resource
Where are the
area or
page
section
numbers?
you're talking
I'm seeing
about?
it just down at the bottom
Oh,
of my
down,
Word
okay,
document.
not on my computer, then it
No.
will tell me what page it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Closer, it's still.
item 7 on page 33 seems to be identical to item B2 on page 35 and identical to page 45B1. And I'm wondering if,
Is this the no new?
No new bulkheads,
Bulkheads
groins, or
one?
coastal engineering structures?
Okay.
so it looks like it appears 3 different places, and the question I had is, it should appear in the first place. Can you just simply reference that rather than have all those words and keep extending the pages?
It's for
It's
each
in
It's
new
for
resource
each
area.
resource
Yeah,
area,
it's different on
unfortunately.
each one.
Because I'm reading this saying, I read this before, wait a minute.
Yeah,
Yeah, we have a
I
lot
read
of,
it again.
we have a lot of repeat.
and there are
performance standards.
some projects where it could be repetitive, like if they have coastal beach, coastal bank, and inland under the ocean on the same
It's on the
site,
Same site.
then they don't have to do it 3 times, they only have to do it 1 time, but if you have just one of those things and not the others, you still have to do it.
Page 37, I just mentioned it, you said they're gonna pick it up, but the numbering is interesting. 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4. Page 36, 37, page 37.
Joe, you're putting us all to shame here, you understand?
Well, I'm reading this stuff, I'm
This
saying,
is
wait a minute,
co-
does
coastal
one belong
beaches.
ahead of 2?
Yeah.
No, you're quite right.
Performance centers, for
Quite right.
coastal beaches, I think he's
Right.
talking about.
Yes, he is. And it was 1, 2, skips down.
Yeah, sometimes the
Just
number,
because-
you
It's,
change
it's
some
the new
numbers, it doesn't
math,
change
Joe.
the rest
You are
of them.
clearly
It's
not
because
familiar
the
with
the
the new math.
numbering
One you
restarted.
highlight. Yeah, because they were numbered differently, and then when you change the
Yeah.
you change the
Yeah.
one, it would only change the
Yeah.
first 5 and not the
Yeah.
rest. I hate that when that happens. And you gotta go down and change every one after that.
For all of the great things that Word does, numbering is not always the most
No.
intuitive.
So try
No, I've
throwing
had
a
trouble
picture
with
in
that.
there somewhere.
Well, you know, the military is trying to get away from PowerPoint because they reckon it's dumbing down the entire military.
So they don't
For
have to do anything
presentation.
themselves with their own brains?
Well, they just feel that PowerPoint is so inflexible in the way that it's
Well,
used
it's
that
better
they're
than
trying to
Google
get away
Slides,
from it.
so.
That's
I have
interesting.
Page 39, item 2, line 4, at the very end, there's a comma missing. It says resiliency wildlife. I don't think so. I think it's resiliency,
Comma
wildlife.
wildlife.
Oh, I see that.
Well, we're gonna have to wordsmith thing all over again.
Are you sure you don't
Wordsmith
wanna get a
again.
job as a copy editor?
I know. Would you like to come to the
I don't
school?
like doing this. I don't. However, when I see agreements that we turn out at the company and there are things screwed up like this, it just pisses me off because it looks terrible if it's not formatted properly. You
Right.
see the numbers like that going 4, 5, 6, 1, 2. I mean, simple stuff. It looks like you don't know what the hell you're doing.
I used to do it because I was a reporter for the paper, so I
So
had to do
in
it all the
fact,
time.
Joe, one
I
thing
didn't
has
look at it for
slipped.
those things.
You didn't get size of Dunefield, it's compressed as one word rather than two, which is,
Oh, goodness.
That
on-
could be a
I
formatting
think
issue.
Dean
okay.
is one word.
I don't think so.
Is it hyphenated?
No.
The
No,
mixed bag.
All
It's,
right,
uh,
page 50.
not,
It's
Lisa,
up
not
to
unless we go to the
interpretation.
Urban Dictionary.
Oh, really? You,
All right, so I want
You
to,
can
I
hyphenate
want
anything you
to
want
keep,
there.
I want to still give Joe the floor because he has it here. Sorry, I'm
Yeah,
just
it's two,
navigating
it's
to page 50.
Huh.
If I can find that.
I've actually been there.
It looks like kind of near Salt Ponds.
Hmm.
If
All right.
he's right.
I stand corrected. But I don't like it.
Oh, yeah, number 10.
Where are we now, Joe?
So
Number
it's
10 on
above
page
Salt Ponds.
50. The last words is another.
So Salt
And to be
Marshes.
consistent, it ought to be a period after another.
Okay, so that's 10 under Salt Marshes.
And let me see, almost done here, I got a couple more. Page 68.
Oh, that's a big paragraph. Don't you just love it when the kids do run-on sentences and the entire paragraph is one sentence?
I mean, if they can even write that far, it's rough stuff. It's better than IDK, that's just what they write.
Oh, man.
IDK.
I don't know. Is that what that is? Oh, my goodness.
If you find more, Joe, you could always.
To which
feel
you
free
say,
to see 'em. You can
FO,
always email
find
us,
out.
too. We can see 'em, and we can.
And page 71 has a couple of interesting things. 71, for example, number 3.
There's
Ah, yes.
nothing there.
3, this is really a good
Open to
bunch of words in
interpretation.
there.
Mhm.
And what else is in there?
Page is that?
It's under control and mitigation of invasive.
plant species.
And then in 2, 1, 2,
390-28-28.
there's something underlined in green. It says Nantucket or plants organized. I think it should say plants. There's something wrong in there. I don't know what it is. On Nantucket or plants recognized. That needs to be cleaned up somehow or other.
Which number?
Yeah, I think-
Two.
Sorry, so
On page 71.
in addition to the mass prohibited plants list, plants currently recognized by the Invasive Plant Species Committee of the Nantucket Biodiversity Initiative as invasive or high risk of becoming invasive to native plant communities on Nantucket, or plants recognized by the Massachusetts Invasive Plants Advisory Group are to be considered invasive plant species and regulated as such.
Yeah, there are truant commas there again. It needs a few commas in there to make it
Yeah,
read.
but I think that's fine.
Yeah.
We're basically saying the prohibited plant list, the MBI list, and the MyPeg list are the lists that say what invasive plants are.
That's it.
All right.
Nice.
Impressive, Joe.
Linda, do you have anything you want to discuss?
No, I'm just, it's very interesting reading reading this. You learn an awful lot by reading this and some of the comments on the side that we've gotten from some other people, but I was just, one thing that's stuck in my craw for years, because I used to be across the hall from them. We're all over at 37 Washington Street, and I remember distinctly Peggy Fantozzi putting something in here out of vengeance, because I could hear the conversation across the hall. It was that 2-foot separation thing. There's no basis for it, is my understanding, anywhere in the state or here. And Jeff can probably talk to it better than I can. Yeah, so go ahead.
Squam Road,
Yeah.
I think I've heard it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Squaw Road.
not to tell like tales here, but there's a property at Squam Road that was getting permitted, and what ended up happening is the foundation that was installed is essentially wrapped by a impervious membrane around it. I remember like staking it out and like having to do it with a Sharpie, because we couldn't poke a hole through it. So they poured the concrete on top of it and wrapped it, and then to deal with the amount of water that was coming in on, they created a foundation drain, and then they pumped it up to an infiltration trench, and it essentially just recycled water over and over and over and over and over, in the same water. It just would flow down, because the direction of groundwater flow in, get pumped back up, and then drain out and go. That's at least what the engineers designed to make that work. And that project, because of that collection system and moving, spawned when they opened up the regulations to do it, them inserting a 2-foot separation of groundwater to try to prevent that level of like permanent dewatering going forward. And that was the way that they did it. And also just at the time, having been there weren't a lot of scientific papers that were talking about a groundwater protection distance related to things like foundations or things that are there. All of the groundwater separation distances related to things like septic systems and actual water discharges for that distance. But it made it into the regulations and has existed ever since. It's never really been dug into or looked into or what the real effect of some of those things are. But that's how the story, how it came to be. Unfortunately, that's where it is, but it's what's on the books right now.
So if there's no basis for it, and I know
Well,
from the
there is a
conversations.
basis.
It is a
There is a
basis.
basis for it.
Well,
And,
from the
yeah.
conversations, it came out of something other than it's based on fact and science.
Right, I
And
think
that's what concerns me about having it still in here.
it may have originally maybe not had the backing. I mean, with shifting wetlands and water tables, and sea level rise, saltwater intrusion, I do think we wanna make sure that groundwater is not impeded by structural elements and things of that nature. And also to avoid the, now my basement's flooding, what do we do? You know, it kind of removes people from this vulnerable groundwater zone, is the benefit that I think it has.
Can we get Jeff do some little digging around to see if we can get a scientific basis
Oh,
for it?
yeah, I mean, we can get scientific reports to this. I mean, the other thing that Ashley touched on is, with sea level rise, people think of sea level rise as like water coming from the ocean around the sides and, you know, infiltrating around the sides. But the other thing that sea level rise does is it pushes your freshwater groundwater closer to the surface. So salt water's filling or putting pressure underneath the aquifer, pushing it up. So fresh water is rising closer and closer to the surface. And if we have that 2-foot separation, we're making homes resilient against future change in groundwater condition. And I think there is a lot to say about not wanting to impede flow, but it also just makes sense to not have to burden the commission and the staff with constant dewatering requests for structures that are gonna come into play in the future as this freshwater, groundwater gets closer to the surface.
And is
And
it 2 feet versus 12
systems
inches?
that might
versus
fail
18 inches, I'm just.
and do
it's just
fail.
sort of
Yeah,
left
I
out
don't-
blue.
I won't admit that I know that 2 feet is the right level, but there has to be some level, and we should look into the science about that.
And I'm sure it would be different depending on where you are around Nantucket, but
Yeah.
like, what's a normal fluctuation in our water table over a year?
Yeah, and
You
it,
might have
it
to
may
go
be
6
more.
inches.
It may be more in some cases.
Right.
It might be
Yeah.
several feet in some cases, and in some cases that just have like perched water tables with redoxomorphic conditions where they're getting groundwater technically from a regulatory standpoint, but it's not really groundwater because it's on top of clay. You know, that water probably moves like centimeters, but in other areas, it probably moves several feet on an annual basis.
Well,
Well,
let me
it
shoot.
certainly does around the Pages old property out in Sconset, which is now where you have that view over Sackage Pond.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Oh, right.
And those ponds go from being empty some summers to having 6 to 8 foot of water, those kettle ponds. So there are huge fluctuations there.
Well, should we
That's
look
right.
at the 2 foot
I think.
versus 6 inches in Mattocket versus 4 feet elsewhere? I mean, should this be looked at? I mean, 2 feet may not be universal.
If you
I
want to
think
look at
it's-
it, but I think I'm happy with 2 feet personally.
Yeah, I'm personally happy with the two. I think it's not a concern to look at it and see what the science says. I just think trying to create a regulation that is so variable across the entire island is going to be really hard to do, hard to keep track of, hard to enforce, hard to understand for anybody. So I think simple is better in this case.
I think if it's a matter of distance that we're concerned with and what that is, I think that Will and I could probably look and try to find some stuff for what other places are doing and pull that together, and I don't think that slows down the review here. And then during the public hearing process, if we have the information that people can review, if it turns out that it's a foot or 3 feet or 6 inches or whatever it turns out to be, can actually have some actual information behind it besides someone picking 2 feet,
Right.
pick 2 feet.
Okay, thank you.
That's just always sort of bugged me.
No, I think that's a good point to flush out.
If it makes you feel better, Linda, it's always bothered me too because it wasn't that. And actual, like, someone did a lot of due diligence to be like, this is the number it should be because this is the number it should be, is a number that was picked because it was the number that was picked, so.
Yeah,
Something
and
a fluffy
without
number.
like further beating this one, but if we're going to look into it, it also might be wise to, research how different structure entering the subsurface area changes groundwater flow differently. Like there's a 1 inch diameter helical pile versus a full frost wall of a foundation, obviously is a lot different. A whole concreted pool is different than, sonotube, so I
Yeah.
think it is important to have some specificity there if we're gonna change this. I think it's important to look into.
Yeah, who knows, there might be an inverse ratio, so the larger the impediment, it might be squared or cubed rather than just straightly linear, so,
Right.
you know.
And do we need to look into differentiating between, a simple
Right.
piling versus a
Right.
10,000 square foot foundation or, whatever.
Because I would think all of that has a different impact on,
And yeah, I mean,
Okay.
maybe what we need isn't any number at all, but a ratio or coefficient that says this amount of impact into the subsurface area needs to be mitigated by this amount of separation. That's a way to get at it, but, well, Will and Jeff can look into it.
Well, and I think it's good to have your
Still happy to
perspective
be
as
on
the
board, Will?
more regular
Million percent.
enforcers and people to go
Couldn't
out
be happier.
what's realistic.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also something too, I think Seth talked about it a little bit. I think to me, there's also a big distinction between groundwater and purged groundwater, where groundwater is, you know, your direct connection to the first aquifer or something that's there, where a purged water table, especially in these areas where there's wetlands, is an unnatural ground, or not unnatural, it's natural, but it's not the same. It's just an area where water is collecting on top of a constrictive layer that's not true groundwater, but it
Yeah.
functions slightly like that. It's a little bit different, but that involves like digging test holes.
And we haven't really defined that anywhere in our regulations, we just treat all groundwater as groundwater. If you dig down and you hit this feature, it's automatically groundwater, whether there's
Yeah.
a clay layer underneath it or not, so maybe we do need to define that.
We had a well dug several years ago. The guy who dug the well said he hit water at 27 feet. Now, we're talking about 2 feet. Is that possible? It would be that low, 27 feet? In
Oh,
this
yeah.
area,
Yeah.
in this area.
Yeah.
For sure.
It could be like
I think my
hundreds
well's,
of
yeah,
feet
my
in
well's
some
down by
places.
like 40 feet, I think.
My well's down 98 feet.
And in some places, it might be 4 inches before you hit water if you
Yeah.
dig a soil pit.
And nice water instead of brackish.
I don't know if it's
Depends where
nice.
you go.
Yeah.
It depends.
On the site to
Yes.
site.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you're really looking at, you know, where you have your constrictive layers that are able to support water or provide that, you know, the saturation to move through. And then you also have small deposits of that material that collect over time, where you can get little tiny things, but most perch water tables wouldn't be able to support a residential well. You dry that thing out in like 2 days.
Yeah.
But 27 feet, even for this area, doesn't seem to be out of hand.
When I was a youngster.
You didn't take that by hand?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was working for Lyle Rickard and Mike Gordon as a teenager, we were driving wells by hand. You know, out of Nantucket, we hit water at about, in those days, at about 6 feet. Now, I mean, actual fresh water, you know, but when I was a youngster.
I remember those holes,
And
we were
Nantucket
down at
too
the
has
beach, they used to dig us and put
aquifers
us
that
in
you
the
can
hole
sell
and
it.
then
Yeah, yeah.
sand
Right, it's
bottom.
highly variable.
We'd
Actually,
always,
interesting.
you know,
Yeah,
maybe
if you're
4
in,
feet
like,
down there, there's water.
Yeah, yeah, it's
You know,
true.
Like middle of
It's true.
And then they wouldn't take us
the
out.
moors, and you try to dig a
We'd be
well
in
there, you
sand,
probably
couldn't
go
get out.
100 feet
You know,
plus.
like
before
6 or
you
7
get
years
anything.
old.
You'd be going a ways. Or if you're trying to do it for municipal water and you're digging into the second aquifer instead of the top aquifer, you're already going down farther. If you really want to make a break point and go for number 3, you're going hundreds of feet.
Yeah, there's like a 800 feet down. I
Yeah,
think.
and it's huge.
Yeah, because I was down, my well was down, I think, 50 feet maybe when I built the house in '83. And then he had to go down a lot farther. The second one he put the submersible pump in, he just kept going to get down to the next one.
It varies too, and sometimes you see those guys, you know, there's a little bit of an art to well drilling. You may hit water, just not think that it's the water that you want. You keep going, so. We'll bring in the Jenkins and those guys to come in and talk about
Yeah.
I
well
think it's,
drilling.
Ashley, it's your turn now.
I'm good with what you guys have gone through already.
Ashley
They-
sometimes cheats and sends me comments in
Just,
advance.
Sometimes talk,
I just
yeah,
have,
talk
like,
with Jeff.
one more thing for Will probably, and I've mentioned it before, but before this, definitely before it gets officially adopted, but probably before we have the hearing, can you go through and check all of the scientific names and do a taxonomic update for all of those? Because I noticed a lot of them have changed. And they'll probably change in the time that we have until to do the next update, but it's still good to use the latest taxonomy.
As close as we can get.
I'm with you there.
What's the process once this is done in this committee? What
So we have to
We
send it.
crack open a bottle of champagne.
Yeah, I'll be so
So-
excited. It's
Just
like,
one?
I feel like
Well,
we'll-
Well, the
less than
package-
$50.
That's a lot of people for
There
one.
you go.
So,
Now we put our flak jackets on for the people in the public.
so where we're at, right?
And our
is-
helmets.
Is we get the proposed regulations drafted.
Mhm.
They go to town council for review to make sure we haven't put anything in that's illegal. They don't say whether they agree or disagree with setbacks or whatever it is, just as long as it's legal and within our legal authority. After that, we have to have an advertised public hearing. So we'll get it back from town council. We'll try to sync it up, so we're like, hey, we'll have it to you next week. We can start the advertising process, or at least scheduling the public hearing. Have to advertise it in the newspaper for 3 weeks. And then we can have the public hearing. And then at the public hearing, you guys can have any further discussion that you want. The public can say whatever they want, and if there's further revisions from those comments, we can make those. Or if there are not, you guys say, move to approve the regulations and set an effective date when you do that. And then we have to advertise the fact that there are regulatory changes that become effective on, I believe we have to do that for an additional 2 weeks after the public hearing has concluded, just to let people know, and then they can take effect. So
What's the reasonable end date to this whole process?
when we're done.
No, I mean, February, March, April?
Some of it will depend on town council time. I would say for something like this is usually like a 3 to 4 week process for them to get through, just to make sure. So I think if we could send the regulations to them, I feel like we could hopefully get them back before the first of the year. And then, this is a tricky time, Thanksgiving, Christmas.
Yeah,
and
the holiday's gonna
things
have
like
an
that.
impact.
That maybe get them back around the first of the year and have our advertised hearing for them sometime in January. And then they could take effect sometime in, probably in February or March.
Yeah,
We ready to go?
I mean, I think my goal is like March 15th, like we're like, we can't go past that. We've got to get
That's
this done.
if everything goes well.
Yeah,
Who might object to some of these?
Surveyors,
yeah, I mean, a lot of our
Engineers.
project applicants might say,
yeah, the guys that come
or
in here.
even like realtors might be pushing people to say, no, that land area between the 25 and 50 is
But that's-
important for
that's good.
patios, you know?
That's gonna be a big one, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the one I hear the most about, is that one.
Yeah.
Of
So
everything in
we-
here.
So we need to have the scientific evidence to
Yeah. Well,
say-
and at the same time, right? You can hear it all you want, but someone's gotta come to the meeting. Present
Right.
that case to, so.
Right.
People like to complain and not participate, so. It's easy to complain and not participate.
So depending on that, but the big hurdle time-wise that's left, there's the advertising part, but then the big hurdle that's left is just getting the changes reviewed.
Is this ready to go to the council,
We
town
need to
council?
put in stuff from
Stuff that had to
today,
be fixed.
Seems like there's a couple outstanding questions, but other than that,
so maybe by like December
Well,
1st.
I think realistically, the changes that were put in today, and some of them are grammatical, there's a couple substantive issues to address. But I think they're probably small enough that we're just down to those couple, that we could probably add this as an agenda item to the meeting on the 1st, just to review those couple things, and then maybe send it off from that meeting. Because I think,
Sure.
Do
I
we,
think as far as the bulk of it goes, we're pretty close.
do we also need to like make a motion to say, all right, ready to send this off to town council?
Probably at that point.
Probably.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, it probably helps.
Yeah, so then let's put it on that December 1st.
So we'll put that- That's why I've been running that other business discussion, regulatory updates, just in case, so it's been on there. But I think that's fair, and that gives enough time to get a couple of those things addressed and looked to. And like I said, if we're still working on a number specific, like the groundwater separation one, can always address that number during the public hearing with that information, because that's not gonna change town council's review, if that's 2 feet or 6 inches or a foot or
Mhm.
4 feet, right? The review has already been conducted on that portion that it's been in for forever, it's just adjusted the number, so.
Yeah, it's more like the maintenance question, I think,
Mhm.
is important, and
Mhm.
maybe the permeability question.
two things sound good.
Cool.
Right.
Well, do
Well,
we,
if there's,
I'll move to adjourn then,
perfect,
Second.
all right.
and there we go.
All
And
in
thumbs up,
favor?
Thumbs
up.
Aye.
Have a
Any
great
opposed?
Thanksgiving,
No?
Happy
everybody.
Thanksgiving, everybody.
Oh, yeah.
It's coming.
Someone said
I know, Seth,
Thanksgiving
I've
is
been
next week and I was
Missing
like,
your holiday decor,
second.
like